everyone. Welcome to this edition of the Human School's Curation Corner. Just one part of our learning journey here at the Human School. I'm Randy.
I'm Chad.
And in each episode of the Curation Corner, we engage with each other in a brief conversation that's focused on a specific resource. First, we're going to summarize the author's ideas. And then we're going to each make connections to our own experiences. And then we'll finally close out the episode by sharing our insights that further our learning. And in this episode, we're chatting about the article, Do You Suffer from a Failure of Imagination? And this article is by Jim Kalbach. If you're interested in the actual article, you can find a link below this video at thehuman.school. All right, so let's get started. What is the author saying? So as humans, we often experience failure due to a lack of imagination. That's his big premise. And he gives an example, the example of 9/11 and the 9/11 Commission. In their report, they outlined 4 areas of failure. And guess what the 4th one was? It was imagination. And there was this quote that he writes that resonated with me. Innovation starts with an idea and a vision of a better future. In other words, with our imaginations. So this idea of thinking about the future, strategic foresight, getting out of the present and into the possibilities of the future, is an example of imagination in action. And the last thing that he shares is that imagination is best ignited when we're working together in groups, in teams, and it's what he calls the collaborative mindset. So the connection that I was making here was around what a lot of schools are working on these days in creating new outcomes around something called the profile of a graduate. And what I was connecting to was that it's really important that as we collaboratively design these tools, like the profile of graduate, that we are thinking long-term, we're thinking into the future, and really keeping ourselves in check that we're not staying grounded in the present and this current systems-based paradigm that we're in. And that, to lack an imagination for the new skill sets and the dispositions necessary in a human-centered worldview is something that we really need to keep in check. Things like empathy, self-awareness, relationships, connection. Some people might even say love.
One of the things that resonated too for me was around IDEO's strategy of brainstorming, how they all sit in a room together with Post-it notes. They put every single idea that they can come up with, no matter how outlandish, up, and then sort through them all. And all ideas have equal weight and equal value, which I just think is really incredible, because when you're thinking about, in this situation, he's talking about red teaming and counterfactual thinking, and the idea that we have these mindsets of this is what's true and this is what works and this is the traditional and this is what we know keeps us from using our imagination and being able to imagine those futures that we haven't even anticipated. So I really appreciate IDEO's strategy around all ideas are good ideas and working with a team and taking all of those seriously, because it's what allows us to move forward in ways that we don't anticipate necessarily, but then also in ways that are better than we ever thought they could be.
I connected with this phrase in the book I'm currently reading called Walk Out, Walk On. And the phrase was start anywhere, follow it everywhere. And I think it really juxtaposes some of this thinking here. Now, I will say that I think a big connection here also is the idea that you can design for play or design for imagination. And that design for play is something that we've explored and talked a lot about before. But what I love about the phrase start anywhere, follow it everywhere is the idea that so often, we wait for the perfect solution, or we wait for the perfect moment, or we wait for, everything to be together. And that phrase really implies like you just got to start. But, and here's the key, you follow it everywhere it wants to go. And I think that with imagination, having this big vision is the starting anywhere. Like, let's start with this big audacious vision of who we want to be and how we want to grow as a group or an organization. But then being open to what our imagination provides us. And so I think that I oftentimes think about the unintended outcomes as being really beautiful of that work. whenever we start a process and it's clearly defined, you get where you want to go because you know the target, but you're not always open to the beautiful unintended outcomes that come from that if you're not willing to be imaginative around it. And in a way, one of the things that I connected to with us here at the Human School are really around the two compass points of being an objector and a designer, right? Or an inventor. So being an objector is, asking lots of great questions and doing so from a place of expertise or from a place of leadership, and that everyone within an organization can feel called to serve. And I think that play and imagination is a structure that can provide people that space to do that. It's permission, which again, that's a whole debatable conversation for us. And then I think the inventor part of it is intentionally designing for play and imagination within these ideas. And so those are some of the connections that I made. I'm interested to hear from both of you.
I made the same sort of connection around the objector mindset, that idea of leadership being something that doesn't require a title, and treating all of the people who work with you as equally valuable in their insights, that it doesn't require them to be at a certain level or a certain hierarchy to have their imagination and their ideas to be valued. And I think the other thing that he pointed out that I really thought was important was the importance of psychological safety, the belief that you are safe to share these ideas, that people will value your ideas regardless of your title. And then also that you're seeing that confirmation come from those people who do have a higher title than you, that there is encouragement that occurs when you share something that's considered sort of outside the box, and that kind of perpetuates that psychological safety too. It's what allows for the imagination, the creativity to keep moving forward. So those values around leadership not being a title, but anybody who chooses it in that moment, I think was really powerful. But I think having that psychological safety is what allows that to be true.
So listening to the two of you share your insights, it's making me think kind of meta about the Human School project. And, it's very collaborative. We're going into this journey. It's going to be messy. It even says that on the website. We're here playing with these ideas. We're trying to ignite our imagination. And as we go through this, I think part of our vision is we want to ignite the imagination of other people. And let's see what happens. What do we create? How can we move this world of education and schooling forward, as we collaborate and as we sort of cultivate our imaginations? And I think, Chad, you said it, like, we really don't know what the outcome's going to be, but that's kind of the fun of it all, too. The other connection that I'm making is in the area of leadership, certainly something that I think we're all curious and interested in, especially how do we redefine that role? And I think that we need to have imagination as we become objectors. We become curious about this idea of leadership. And we begin to ask questions like, what new competencies do leaders need to lead in this future, to lead the design of human-centered systems? And it reminds me of something that I read really recently, a white paper by Valerie Hannon and Anthony McKay, where they come up with 5 what they call signposts. And I think they're kind of like new competencies around leadership: leading for new educational narrative, leading for ecosystems, leading for equity, leading for innovation, and leading for futures literacy. Things that we don't necessarily think of as we're so embedded in the present, but as we start to think about the future, I think those are really 5 interesting things that we can start to think about, that we can start to engage our imaginations in as we redefine this role of leader in a human-centered system and human-centered change.
One of the things I keep coming back to, right? I mean, when you talk about those competencies, I go back to like the designing for it. I think that a lot of people see, imagination and play as being kind of wild and free. And the thing that we oftentimes talk about are guardrails, right? There's a way to create or design a structure for there to be intentional play or intentional imagination. It can be freewheeling, right? I mean, it can just be, what do we think? And that can be really fun. Not everybody works that way. And so I think the interesting component of this, like where you just described those 5 new competencies, it creates a structure, but there's so much space within that structure to play with, well, what are the skills that are within that, right? And so I think people misinterpret my perception, I'd love you guys to push back on that idea or wonder around it, is people kind of hear these ideas and think that just is like completely freewheeling and unencumbered. And I don't think that has to be true. Certainly in a really functional organization or group of people, you may not have to have those tight of guardrails, but in general, designing intentionally for it can help it be incredibly productive.
I think that's our need to have that sort of over clarity of things, that checklist, that definition, that exact, like, what does it look like? What do I need to do? That kind of thing. And I think that's part about thinking into the future too. We have to release that need to have all the detail, and to use our imagination. I think it comes back to the article too. Like, do we have enough imagination? And we definitely need to work on that. All right. Well, this is the end of our first episode. We're going to wrap this up with a bit of a summary around our different insights. So here are our insights and connections to this particular article. First, we need imagination as we transform roles within a transformed system of schooling. Second, imagination becomes more possible with an objector mindset when there's a psychological safety to be a leader regardless of title, and share our own ideas and imaginations. And finally, designing for imagination, a place to play, is critical to our collective success as long as we are open to the outcomes that come from that imagination. As always, thanks for learning alongside us on this particular episode of the Human Schools Curation Corner. You can join us in today's conversation in the Learning in Public Hub at thehuman.school or on our YouTube channel. The Human School, by placing humanity at the center of all design, the Human School seeks to share an evolving story of learning and its impact on the world. And we can't wait to hear how you are intentionally placing humanity at the center. For additional resources, visit the Human School at thehuman.school and the Learning in Public Hub, and join the community committed to placing humanity at the center of all design.